World of Warfare presents the Battle of Salerno. After the Allies' victory in North Africa, by the late spring of 1943, Allied war planners looked north across the Mediterranean for an invasion of mainland Europe, and while American leaders like General George C. Marshall advocated for the immediate invasion of France, the British insisted on a strike in southern Europe in what Prime Minister Winston Churchill termed the soft underbelly of Europe. When it became increasingly obvious that insufficient resources at the time would severely jeopardize a cross-channel landing, President Franklin D. Roosevelt acquiesced to an invasion of Sicily, which the Allies deemed to be a massive threat to air and sea routes within the Mediterranean theater of operations. Leading the fight in Sicily was Lieutenant General George S. Patton's 7th Army and General Sir Bernard Montgomery's 8th Army, who eventually proved victorious after a bloody 38-day campaign, which ultimately trapped the Germans in a pincer maneuver that forced them to flee to the north of Italy. The Allies' attack on Italy also forced the dismissal of Italian dictator Benito Mussolini in late July, followed by peace overtures with the Allies by Italian monarch King Victor Emmanuel III, which further destabilized Hitler's campaign in the east and on the Italian mainland. While the Americans initially wanted to come ashore in northern Italy, the collapse of Mussolini's government and the Allies' victory on Sicily dramatically altered the playing field, leading Allied war planners to choose Salerno as their primary invasion point due to its calmer surf conditions, proximity to Allied air bases in Sicily, and a well-developed infrastructure of roads leading into the Italian interior, both to the north and the south, at the same time relieving pressure on the Soviets by forcing Hitler to redeploy much of his Eastern Front assets to the defense of Italy. Invasion planning fell to Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower and the commander of the 15th Army Group, General Sir Harold Alexander, who devised two operations known as Baytown and Avalanche, the first calling for landings at Calabria by Monti's 8th Army on September 3, 1943, followed by Operation Avalanche at Salerno on September 9th, led by Lieutenant General Mark Clark's 5th Army, creating a pincer maneuver against German forces expected to pour into the Salerno region from the north of Italy. Montgomery came to oppose Operation Baytown since he felt that his men would be too far removed from the main landing force at Salerno, which ultimately proved correct when his 240,000-man 8th Army was forced to march 300 miles to reach the primary centers of fighting near the Salerno beachheads. Beginning in the early hours of September 9th, Lieutenant General Richard McCreary's British 10 Corps landed 5 miles north of the Sello River, while Major General Ernest J. Dawley's U.S. 6 Corps came ashore at Paestum, south of the Sello River. To the left of the British, U.S. Rangers and British Commandos landed on the coastal plains of the Sorrento Peninsula, which by the end of the first day saw an Allied landing force of 54,000 infantry, supported by a massive buildup of artillery batteries and several battalions of tank and tank destroyers, ferried ashore by 627 troop and transport vessels and supporting warships that delivered punishing naval gunfire to high-ground German gun emplacements and troop positions. Day one of the invasion also witnessed approximately 1,000 medium and heavy bombers and over 1,400 fighters and fighter bombers flying missions from bases on Sicily, as well as 128th aircraft flying from British escort carriers. In response to the Allied invasion, Lieutenant General Hermann Bach's 14 Panzer Corps was called to the defense of Salerno by Commanding General Heinrich von Vietinghoff, along with the 16th Panzer Division, led by Lieutenant General Rudolf Sikenzius, which had been largely rebuilt after its near destruction at Stalingrad the year before. Contrary to Vietinghoff's orders, however, Bach did not move directly on Salerno, but instead halted 10 miles north of the port, leaving the 16th Panzer Division to absorb the full force of the Allies' push inland. Having taken over their area of responsibility only hours before the invasion, Sicilius and his men manned 6 high-ground shore batteries between Salerno south to Agropoli, which allowed them to assault the entire shoreline in and around Salerno. For the direct defense of the invasion beaches, Sicilius used the division's 105 tanks and 36 assault guns clustered in small units, supported by a platoon of infantry, which dramatically slowed the enemy's progress inland. During the first few days of the invasion, German ground forces also enjoyed air support from the Luftwaffe, who flew some 450 sorties against Allied beach positions. Yet the Germans' initial ground offensives proved inadequate against Allied naval firepower and field artillery, and despite the Allies' initial light opposition upon landing, their anticipated push inland fell far short of expectations, when by nightfall of the first day, the Allies' actual line ran 3 miles southeast of Salerno and 2 miles inland, a good 4 miles short of the mouth of the Sella River, along with the capture of Capaccio by 6th Corps and Monte Sotano by a unit of the 36th Division. On the downside, however, the right flank of 6th Corps found themselves pinned down under heavy fire, while the day one objectives of capturing Montecorvino Airfield, Salerno Harbor, and Battipaglia had not been taken from the Germans. On September 10th, the Southern Commander-in-Chief, Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, approved Vietinghoff's order to direct Major General Eberhard Rod's 15th Panzer Grenadier Division and Lieutenant General Paul Conrad's Luftwaffe Panzer Division Hermann Göring to close in on Salerno, simultaneously moving Lieutenant General Fritz Herbert Grazer's 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division from Rome to Salerno. Given the overall strength of the Salerno landing force, Vietinghoff retracted German troops attacking Montgomery at Calabria and moved them to the defense of Salerno, including Major General Smilo Freihardt von Lützwitz 26th Panzer Division, Major General Traugott Heer's 76th Panzer Corps, and Major General Walter Fries' 29th Panzer Grenadier Division. As new German forces joined the battle, the Allied 56th Division near Battipaglia found themselves under heavy artillery fire before being driven out of the area by enemy tanks and infantry of the 16th Panzer Division. Another German offensive at a tobacco factory between Battipaglia and Montecorvino drove back elements of the 56th Division's 201st Guards Brigade, pushing them back toward the beach, while the American sector's left flank of 6th Corps sustained heavy casualties as it advanced to the Calore River, pushing back against stiff German resistance until they secured the blown-out bridge at Ponte Sella. On the Americans' right flank, multiple battalions advanced from Paestum toward Hill 424, capturing the town of Altavilla, only to face off with a counterattack by 25 German tanks, which was ultimately repulsed by withering naval bombardment and field artillery fire. September 11th followed the same pattern of seesaw combat witnessed on the 10th, with intense fighting around the now-repaired bridge at Ponte Sella, Calore, and Altavilla, while the most intense fighting occurred in and around Battipaglia and the tobacco factory, where an egregious number of British soldiers were killed or captured. To the north of the beachhead, the commandos and rangers met with increased pressure from Kesselring's reinforcement units, which blocked the Allies from breaking out toward Naples. Nearing the end of the 3rd day of fighting, the Allies had expanded their foothold into the port of Salerno, which proved to be too heavily damaged to be usable as a resupply facility. By sundown, the Americans had pushed 10 miles inland, while the British zone remained a short 1 mile inland from the Salerno beachheads. German pressure intensified yet again on September 12th, when Nazi reinforcements poured in piecemeal from the north and the south, executing determined assaults on every sector of the battlefield. When the Allies' 45th Division found themselves encircled by the enemy, Clark transferred the 157th Regimental Combat Team, or RCT, to the Sella region to protect their flank as they advanced northward. Reaching Persano, intense enemy fire took out 7 tanks, shattering the 157th RCT, leading to yet another day of seesaw combat that was eventually broken up by intense naval gunfire from the cruiser USS Philadelphia, eventually clearing German resistance from the sector. After Clark came ashore to establish his headquarters in the 6th Corps area, he toured the battlefield to better assess the situation, recounting later that Allied troops at Salerno had gotten themselves into a bind that risked being driven into the sea, made worse when the 143rd RCT lost Altavilla and Hill 424, while the 56th Division was pushed out of most of Battipaglia. On September 13th, now known as Black Monday, Clark's assessment of the Allies' dire predicament nearly came to fruition. By mid-morning, Vietinghoff was alerted to a gap between the American and British sectors, wrongly concluding that the Allies had deliberately split themselves into 2 distinct sectors in preparation for a beachhead evacuation. Adding to his erroneous conclusion, the arrival of additional Allied ships into the Gulf of Salerno favored his assessment of an impending evacuation, while he further believed that Allied smokescreens around Battipaglia on the British right flank was intended to cover a British withdrawal. Sensing victory was at hand, Vietinghoff sent out an order not just for the simple defeat of the Allies, but for the annihilation of all enemy combatants. After Allied positions around Altavilla and the Sella Calori corridor began to experience increased German resistance, at 2:30 that afternoon, Vietinghoff ordered his 14 Corps to assemble all available forces for an attack south of Eboli, intended to cut off his misperceived enemy withdrawal. Fighting intensified an hour later, when shells slammed American positions at the tobacco factory north of Sella, which led to the rout of the 157th RCT 1st Battalion, leading to the German capture of the Persano crossing and the tobacco factory. Meanwhile, the Germans advanced on the 143rd RCT at Ponte Sella, piercing the 2nd Battalion's right flank, which led to the capture of nearly 500 Allied fighters. By 5 p.m., the Germans were in undisputed control of the corridor between the Sella and Calori rivers, leaving only the 158th and 189th Field Artillery Battalions of the 45th Infantry Division between the Germans and the sea, with the 5th Army's command post just 200 yards behind them. With the enemy in plain sight, American artillery batteries opened fire at point-blank range, while headquarters personnel formed a battle line on the southern bank of the Calori River. Sending his staff by boat to the British sector, when Clark received a call from Dawley asking him what he planned to do about the worsening situation, Clark replied, "Nothing. I have no reserves. All I've got is a prayer." By nightfall on Black Monday, the Fifth Army found itself on the brink of defeat, mainly because it could not add reinforcements by sea due to a shortage of transport ships at the same rate as the Germans could by land. In a last-ditch effort to hold the beachhead, men of the 158th and 189th Field Artillery Battalions, supported by a handful of tanks and tank destroyers, along with Fifth Army Headquarters personnel, fired more than 3,600 artillery rounds in 4 hours, effectively halting the German advance, before forcing them to pull back to Persano when no immediate reinforcements were at hand. Due to heavy infantry casualties, American commanders decided to shorten the American line. On Clark's urgent request, in the early hours of September 14th, 2 battalions of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, U.S. 82nd Airborne Division, came aground near Paestum and then trucked to Montesoprano on the Sixth Corps' right. As dawn approached on the 14th, German High Command ordered an all-out assault on British forces centered near Salerno, shifting their focus to Battipaglia after Allied naval fire and field artillery fire successfully repelled the German attack. Naval and aerial bombardment pummeled the Germans along the Battipaglia-Eboli road, while in the American sector, American tanks and artillery decimated the German flanks, leading to the destruction of all German tanks of the 16th Panzer and 29th Panzer Grenadier Divisions before German infantry withdrew. The Germans launched 2 more attacks by mid-morning near the Selle River, only to be pushed back by effective and accurate naval fire, knocking out 30 enemy armored fighting vehicles by the end of the day. Refusing to taste defeat after his near victory on Black Monday, on September 15th, Vietinghoff ordered an attack northwest from Battipaglia to Salerno by the 26th Panzer Division, while Panzer Division Hermann Göring advanced from Vietri to Salerno. In a fearsome standoff with the British 46th Division, the Germans lost 90 men killed or wounded in an advance that gained less than 200 yards. Fighting continued throughout the night, devolving after sunrise on the 16th to some of the most brutal fighting during the entire battle, with British and German infantry engaging in hand-to-hand combat. Facing overwhelming Allied firepower, after Vietinghoff realized he could not vanquish the U.S. Fifth Army, he asked Kesselring for permission to withdraw, which was officially granted on the 17th. Orders to leave the Salerno region were issued by nightfall, leading to a massive German withdrawal on the 18th, fleeing to the Volturno River, where they dug in and waited for the Allies' continued advance. While the Battle of Salerno officially ended on October 1st, at its most fearsome, Allied losses during the week-long battle witnessed 2,349 killed, 7,366 wounded, and 4,100 missing, while the Germans saw 840 killed, 2,000 wounded, and 603 missing, the majority of German casualties caused by overwhelming Allied naval gunfire and field artillery fire. For the Allies, Operation Avalanche proved to be a near defeat followed by a Hail Mary victory, won only by fierce determination over an equally determined enemy. The fight in and around Salerno in September of 1943 began a 19-month-long battle for control of Italy, and while the Germans displayed unparalleled tenacity against their advancing enemy, in the end, their dogged persistence proved to be no match for the overwhelming resources of the Allies' ever-accelerating war machine, making the Battle of Salerno a commanding Allied victory snatched from the jaws of defeat.